Welcome back to the garden in Raleigh, North Carolina. So you've planted your annuals using best practices, and now you want to know how to maintain them during the season. We have 7 steps that we use in this video to maintain our annuals and get the absolute most out of them that we possibly can during the growing season. I've linked the list down below this video, so if you're here for a particular reason, how to water your annuals, how to fertilize your annuals, how you can look at that list and go right to it in the video. We put up a video a few weeks back before these Summer Jewel salvia got planted along the border here in the back garden, and I broke the soil up using a shovel, and then we put some compost down. All of that soil prep was done so that we can build the beneficial microbes in the soil, the mycorrhizal fungi, the beneficial bacteria. We want all those things helping us out during the summertime. Those things can help bring water, bring nutrients, and again, we're trying to get the most out of these annuals that we possibly can. If you didn't add any compost to the area that your annuals are planted in, you can go back and do that. You can simply, make sure that the other steps in this video are followed and then put a layer of compost down, and that will help, it'll also help prevent weeds, help with a little bit of soil moisture, keeping soil moisture in place. We use this soil cube compost, which is available in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And again, it can be put in the bed even afterwards, okay? And it's still very beneficial to your plants to have a good layer of compost. But again, during the soil prep for this space, we just mixed it into the soil. Number 2 is weeding. Weeding is one of the most important things for your annuals. Your shrubs and trees and other things are probably a little bit more tolerant of having weeds grow around them for some period of time, because they are robbing the nutrients and competing with that stuff, but they're more built for standing up to it. Your annual plants, because of the short season and we're trying to get as much out of them as possible, anything that's stealing nutrients from them is not good. And it's robbing sunlight, and it's also giving a place for insects to hide. And that's also true of leaves. We leave our leaves out here during the, when the fall leaves fall into this garden, we leave them for the winter time, and then we've mulched over them. You can see where we've recently put hardwood mulch over the rest of our beds, where our perennial shrubs, trees, all those kinds of things are. You can see how neat that area looks, and it just went right over top of the leaves. But the leaves in our annual borders are not a good thing. We need to get them out of here, because this big old magnolia leaf is the perfect hiding place laying in this bed for a slug or a snail to hide under during the day and then come out and do some damage to our plants at night. So cleaning up any debris and then any weeds. And so it's crabgrass season right now, so that's crabgrass germinating. As long as I see the root come up on it and there's no seeds on it, I just throw it right back in the bed. I don't worry about it at all. But any of this crabgrass that's in here, I'm going to pull it. As long as I see the roots come up with it, I'll just lay it right back into place. There's a couple winter-related weeds that are still out here, and unfortunately, this is a spot of Bermuda grass, which I definitely don't want in my bed, and I can't throw this one back in. Any of your creeping type grasses or anything like that, you don't want to throw those back in the bed. They'll just root back in potentially. There's some dichondra here, which is actually a native weed, but it's pretty. It loves these composted beds, these well-prepped beds, and it just runs through them like crazy. So again, I'm just going to go through here, weed everything. If there's no seed heads on it and it's just a little light thing like this, it becomes compost. Those types of weeding tasks need to be done all season long, but they don't need to be done in a way where you're like, oh, Saturday I got to weed the annual beds. Typically, I'll just come out here drinking a cup of coffee and pull 5 or 10 things quickly. And sometimes, again, I'll throw them back out there. It depends on how unsightly it looks, or put them in a bucket and throw it on the compost pile. But it doesn't have to seem like the big giant chore that it is. Just get them out as you see them, a few at the time. Don't let it overwhelm you. Next up is deadheading. So third step is when I put these annuals in the ground a few weeks back, we gave them a bit of a haircut. So I just went across the top of them and I cut them basically just like that. But at the time, they were only one little stalk. That pruning created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new flower spikes, okay? I'm gonna do this again. I'm gonna deadhead them one more time. Later in the season, I really don't have to prune them like this, but I can go through and take off spent flowers, because If the plant is putting a lot of energy into making seed, then that's energy it's taking away from it putting on vegetative and flower growth. Okay, so I don't want the old flowers to sit here and the plant, again, putting energy into making seed. I'm doing this second round of deadheading right now though, just to create a bigger, fuller plant. I want this ground covered as fast as possible because right now, with all this area exposed, that's why I'm getting so many weeds in here. Once these are so full enough to block the sunlight out and to be taking advantage of all the prep that we've put into them, it's going to reduce my weed load substantially. So I very quickly go through here. I don't think there's any, you're not going to do anything wrong unless you cut them off right at the base. So, be careful. You can use a pair of hand pruners if you're just doing your fine deadheading where you're taking out just one piece. But I find that this is the fastest way to go. And for me, this is just actually kind of a fun task, and just to cut all these things off at basically the same height and ensure that they're all going to be full. I'm telling you right now, if you come back, if you're sticking around with the channel here and you're watching and you're seeing this, in 2 weeks, these will have responded, be back in full bloom, and be double or triple the volume, of leaves as well. If you go under and come back up, you can do it all in one pruning like that. That's one technique. It's raining on me right now. It rained last night and the tree has decided to give me all of its water right now. This will seem mean to some, but again, it's the best practice for making sure that we can get this bed covered as quick as possible. Cut down on our weeding tab. Some of your annuals are self-cleaning. Basically the flower disappears and it just puts on a little new growth and flowers a little more. There's a couple things, a few annuals like these pentas and this angelonia right here that are great for pollinators, and the flowers last a long time. They kind of outlast their own nectar. And so if you'll notice that you're not getting any bees on your pentas, your angelonia, or any of the open flowers in your garden, frequently that just means those flowers are actually spent. They've already done their thing and they're in the process of making seed, and it's taking energy away the pollinators aren't able to take advantage of. So these angelonia will cut a few times during the season. I didn't need to do it right this minute, other than I'm trying to fill them out like I was just doing those others. But sometime later in the season, you'll see these angelonia, there's just no bees around them. And so what we do is we'll just go through and give them a haircut. They put on some new growth. It takes away from them trying to make that seed and puts on new flowers, and then all of a sudden your pollinators are back. These initial early season prunings that I'm doing right now, just to get them to fill out and cover this bed and hopefully reduce my weed pressure, I will do the entire group just like I just did. Sometime in the summer, we'll give these things a rejuvenation pruning as well. And when we do that, we don't do the whole bed at one time. We're not trying to, I don't want to go out here and cut every flower off, for all of our native bees, non-native bees, whatever that are out here. I'm not trying to cut it all off at one time. So we'll come back and maybe just do this border, and we'll leave the other borders in place and, rotate about once a week, prune down a group, which is also, again, kind of a more fun way to garden anyway than taking this on as, oh my gosh, I have to go and prune these things. Oh my gosh, I have to go and weed these things. Just doing them a little bit at the time just makes them more interesting and funner anyway. I left all of this material in place because I'm going to come back here and put a mulch layer over the top. I could go through here and clean this up. Again, a lot of this times this debris that you leave in here, the leaves or whatever, can be hiding places for other things. Because I'm having this weed pressure, I went through here and flipped the soil over a little more than I had in the last 3 years. I wanted to show how I would start a new annual border. And when I did that, I brought up a lot of weed seeds. Normally, when we're re-putting in these annual borders, we'll just put in a new layer of compost and plant right into that and really not disturb the soil a whole lot. And it doesn't give us a lot of weed pressure. If you're seeing a lot of weed pressure in your annual borders, then I would put down some sort of layer of mulch over the top of it. And we won't use hardwood mulch. I don't use anything that's got any kind of wood product in it, because when it breaks down, it will steal a little bit of nitrogen from your annuals, which to me is not that big of a deal for, again, shrubs, trees, perennials. Those things are tougher. These annuals though, any kind of setback, even if it's super minor, which this is super minor, will slow them down some. So I want to use some sort of something like pine bark, or again, you could just use the compost as your mulch, but we're trying to put a seal down over those weed seeds. We're also trying to keep a little more moisture in place, so we're going to do a little less watering, which we'll talk about in a minute. So it's also a barrier for keeping those mycorrhizal fungi, those beneficial bacteria, all of those things that we're trying to grow in the soil here that take care of our plants. We're trying to protect them. So again, I'm using this pine bark soil conditioner, or really fine ground pine bark. That's what this is. This is a great material for this. A lot of people outside of the Southeast are not going to be able to find it, but you can use anything that doesn't have weed seeds in it. So that can be any composted product, anything that says compost. Garden soils are probably going to be fine. Anything that you can get, again, that you're not adding weed seeds, because we're trying to put a cap down on the top of this. I'll just come through here, throw some out in the middle, rake it around. I'm not trying to bury them up to their necks in it. So it's just a thin coating. It also just looks good, right? It just makes the whole thing much more crispy. I'm just using a double handful. You can put this out here however it works best for you. You can try lots of different techniques for it. And that weed that I pulled right there, if it's gonna sit there on top, we'll get rid of it completely. This is gonna hold in moisture, protect the sun from damaging this beautiful soil that we're building. And it's gonna be decorative, and it's gonna moderate the moisture. And as it breaks down, of course, it will help feed the plants as well. And when it gets dug in next season, it will also help, be part of your composting. Do you guys see the chewed holes in the dahlia leaves? We don't. We don't go around the garden looking for troubles. I'm analyzing the garden from, is the plant vigorous? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? And that dahlia absolutely is. It's growing like a weed. It's adding 4 or 5 inches of growth a day. It's got flower buds on it. It's completely happy. Something has chewed a couple of leaves on it. Our garden is part of the natural world, and things are going to come along and chew on them. That's just the way it is. Okay, it's really not that big of a deal. As long as the plant is able to thrive under those conditions, then everything is fine. We don't push our plants very hard out here. One of the invitations for chewing insects is lots and lots of green growth. So if you're throwing a lot of nitrogen fertilizer, and we'll talk about fertilizing in just a second, that new growth on them is very tender and is very inviting to things like aphids that suck the juice out of the plants. What we're trying to do is grow these things pretty quickly, get as much out of them as possible, but not push them so much that they become the buffet for insect and disease issues. If you have something in your garden, and it doesn't even have to relate to these annuals, and it's underperforming in some way, or it's got insect problems, disease problems, analyze it from first. Maybe it's just not in a place where it's happy. It's in too much shade, too much sun, it's too wet, it's too dry. Something is going on with it that is allowing it to be in a vulnerable state to be attacked by things, disease or insect. Try moving it first in the garden, replacing it somewhere else. Analyze it from that first. If it continues to be a problem and it's taking 70% of your mental energy in your garden for this one thing or two things, pull it out, erase it, put it on the compost pile, and move on, and to keep the things that are not, that aren't 50% of your mental capacity for your garden, and you'll be much, much happier. But these little things where they're chewed, I'm just not going to worry about it. If the plant can outgrow it and outperform it, I'm just moving on with my day. If we do get some sort of chewing insect, something like an aphid that's out on the newest growth, you can try to just take a water hose and hose those off. And generally that will reduce their numbers enough that the plant can then, resist that type of thing. So you just use a water hose on a high blast. One other thing we have going for us out here is we've invited birds into this landscape. This place is a bird paradise. You can probably hear them in the background if you're watching the videos, and a lot of them are insect eaters, and so they're out here. As long as we're again preventing things from being hidden from them. We want to not have leaves in the middle of our annual beds and that kind of thing. If we're giving the robins a way in here and a way to see them, they will just absolutely clean any kind of damaging insects out of these beds. As I just mentioned, we're not pushing our annuals or anything in this garden really so much that they're getting lots and lots of green growth on them, because that is an invitation. The faster something grows, and this comes from being in the nursery business for 20 some years, where we're trying to grow plants as fast as possible to get them onto a shelf somewhere so that they can be sold. The more we push those plants, the more likely they are to have aphids, mites, mealybugs, and all the other scale insects and everything else. Nursery is ground zero for those problems, and it relates to the way in which we're pushing the plants as fast as possible. So slow and steady wins the day. Again, though, with annuals, we're trying to get as much out of them as possible. But the soil microbes, the beneficial bacteria, the beneficial fungi that are in the soil are capable of giving these pretty much all they need. We fertilized about 2 months ago with an organic fertilizer. The compost is part of our fertilizing program. This bark breaking down is part of our fertilizing program. If you were using cow manure, that'd be part of your fertilizing program. I do fertilization based on a visual inspection, okay? I'm looking at it going, I'm just not getting as much out of that plant as I possibly could, and then I will re-fertilize. And I still am using organic fertilizers. You're gonna hear on any kind of how to grow annuals things that you use a water-soluble fertilizer every 7 or 10 days or something like that. I just don't. It's not the practices that I use. The practice I use is I look at these things and I go, wow, this is a great, really rich, dark green color. You could see how fast they had come up earlier in the video and they were in full bloom. Everything's going okay right now. If I see any off coloring, any slowing down of the growth, I'll add additional organic fertilizer to it at that time. Otherwise, I'm just not. Our containers rely on us completely. These annuals on this border are in a clay-based soil, and that clay is really nutrient rich. So there's a lot going for them here in the ground. In our containers, not so much. And we will give those additional fertilizer during the season. But again, I'm not giving them anywhere near the recommended amount that any fertilizer company will tell you to put down, or any website will tell you to put down. Because again, the more you push these things, yes, they will grow faster, but the more vulnerable they become to other issues. Number 7 is watering, and it's probably the most important step, and more because people tend to damage things with too much water. I always heard in doing retail in horticulture, I watered it every day, I don't know what happened. Frequently, it's because you watered it every day. It doesn't mean that, there are probably things in your garden that will need to be watered every day, but we do it by monitoring them, not just because we think that water is a good thing. These plants need oxygen, and there are air pockets in this soil, and they're taking advantage of that. If you fill all those air pockets in with water and continually saturate that and fill all that air in, that will deny them oxygen, and they'll struggle to then bring the proper nutrients up into the top of the plant. And you'll see off coloring, you'll see yellowing, you'll see irregular growth, or just flat out dying from root rot. So be careful with the overwatering. I come out, I put my finger down in the ground a couple of inches, and I feel that the soil's moist. I just put this bark down, which appears pretty dry, and it is on the top, but down underneath it, there is moist soil, so I'm not going to water them. Sometimes you'll come home from work at 7 o'clock, on a summer day, and there'll be a few things in your garden, whether it be a shrub or a perennial, annuals, whatever it is, and they're in a slight wilt, but you check it just like I did, and the soil's still a little bit moist. Those are days I just let the sun go down, and the roots will catch up. What's happened is the sun has taken water out of the top of the plant faster than the roots could take it up. We don't do a lot of watering early in the season. So these went in, I guess, maybe 3 weeks ago at this point. And we've not really maybe watered once. We've been a little dry here and there, but for the most part, we haven't watered these because we're on these cooler days. We take full advantage of stressing them just a hair so that they'll root out. Because in the summertime, if I watered these and gave them everything they needed right in that little spot right there, what reason would it have to root out into the rest of that bed? So we want to, while it's still cool in April and May, maybe even into early June, slightly cooler nights, get them to root out as much as possible so that they're on their own a little bit more during the summer. A lot of controversy on what time of day to water. I will, yes, watering first thing in the morning is probably the best time so the leaves dry off faster. Most of the things that we use, though, we don't use the things that are very vulnerable to powdery mildew. So I tend to avoid geraniums, I tend to avoid verbena, because I know those things are more vulnerable to getting powdery mildew. And here in the southeast United States, where we are, it's humid all the time. It's humid. The leaves have the potential to have moisture on them 24 hours a day. And so regardless of my watering practices, I can still get powdery mildew issues if I'm putting plants in that are more vulnerable. So we tend to avoid plants that have that as one of their main issues. I don't necessarily have time to water at 7 o'clock in the morning. So if I'm here at 6 o'clock in the evening, or I'm here whenever, I'm going to water when they're dry. Air temperature's warm enough that typically they can dry off fast enough if you're having to overhead irrigate them. Of course, you can put a drip hose in here and have it watered from below. So ideally, you would water early in the morning with a drip hose from underneath, and that would be your watering. If that's not the setup you have, you water when they're dry, and you try to water at a time where they can dry off. So, I'm not watering them at 2 a.m., but I'll water them at 6 in the evening. It's still 90 degrees outside here, and the leaves will dry off fast enough. So I just don't worry about it. At the nursery, we used to run what I called a cooling run of our irrigation system every day. If it was 98 degrees outside, I'd turn the water on right over the top of all of our plants in the nursery for about 2 or 3 minutes. And that water that got on top of everything evaporated pretty quickly, and that evaporation cools the air around it, and it would cool everything off. So there are times if it's like 100 degrees out here and these things are struggling, I will come out and water them even during that time of day. That's never something you're going to ever read on any internet site or any website. It won't harm your plants in any way, but evaporation does cool the air. We're about to do a video on container plants, and that's why this whole area is covered in plants and in containers. Containers will end up needing more water than the plants that are in the ground normally. But again, you got to be careful watering your containers that you're not, again, displacing all the air that's in that container with water. So water them thoroughly, but try to let them dry out between waterings. And what you're going to find, and this can probably be a frustration for some, is that maybe your hanging baskets need water every day, but some of your other containers don't. You have to find the pattern. Not all of your containers can be treated exactly the same. Don't water to the, and I've said this many, many times in my life, don't water to the driest plant in your garden, okay? If you're watering the plant that wilts every afternoon and water your entire garden based on that one plant, you will be overwatering almost everything else in your garden. So you'll have a container, again, that will dry out more. Give it a haircut. The same haircut that I gave on these salvias, you can do to your hanging baskets and some of your other flowering things. So if I have these planted, in this container, and all of a sudden this container demands water twice a day, a simple haircut on these will reduce the amount of watering that you're doing on those begonias. If I was going to add an 8th thing to this list, some of your taller growing annuals or perennials or anything that you think might get floppy later in the season, this dahlia that we showed would be a great example of that. I know it's going to end up 4 or 5 feet tall before the season is over. It's a good time early in the season to go ahead and stake it. And that way, by the time it's big and flopped over, it's very difficult to stake. You may not know all the things that need to be staked in your garden. So if you have things that flop over, whether they be annuals, perennials, whatever it is, write those things down so that next year, early in the season, you can go ahead and get them staked. And that way they'll grow up big and tall and perform like they're supposed to be and not end up as a flopped over mess on the ground. So there you go. There's our 7 steps for maintaining your annuals during the growing season. It's a lot of words, but it's really just short steps to get the most out of them. If you're following along with the channel, you'll see that this group of salvia will be this tall, hanging over this area. This old lawn area is about to be a patio as well if you're following along with the channel. Thanks for watching.